Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome. We are giving folks just a little bit of time to log in, but as we are waiting for folks who are logging in, I do invite you to share your name and your role and where you are joining us from today, just so that we get a sense of who's with us today. We are together till 1:30 this afternoon, so it would be great, again, just to get a sense of who's on the line. So if you can, again, please share that into the chat box. And as we're waiting for that, again, just want to thank you for joining us. Part one of our part two or two-part clinical intensive on youth and technology, mental health redefined with Dr. Lisa Stroem. Before we get started, I want to take a moment to orient everyone so you know how to participate in today's event. I'm sure you are familiar with Zoom, but again, just as a quick recap, upon joining the webinar, you have been placed on mute to avoid any background noises that may distract others from listening to the presentation. If you come across any technical issues during today's event, please chat to the CTAC host who will be able to support you. If you would like to activate the closed captions, you can do so by clicking the toolbar button that says live transcript, and then you can select show subtitles. We will have a Q&A portion toward the end, but please submit your questions using the chat box at any point during the webinar today. At the end of today's presentation, we will have a short feedback survey. We would appreciate you completing it. Your feedback and suggestions do help to inform our future offerings. And lastly, the recording and slides for this presentation will be posted on our CTAC webpage, ctech.ny.org within the next 2 to 3 business days. So I'm seeing who's joining us, and we do have, it seems, a good variety of folks in different settings, different programs across the state, social workers, administrators. So it sounds like a really good representation of the child's behavioral health workforce. So I am so glad that you are able to join us today. This offering is available for continuing education credit. So on the following slide, I do want to just give you a quick reminder that we are offering 3 CEs for those that attend both part 1 today and part 2 in 2 weeks. To be eligible, you must be a licensed professional who attends, again, both presentations for at least 75% of the time. You should also be using your unique Zoom link. So sharing your link with somebody else will not be eligible for CEs. And you need to be attending this on a computer. Unfortunately, attending on a cell phone does not qualify for CEs. In the next slide, a little bit of more information, but you don't have to worry too much about taking notes on this. This will be available for download. You will also be receiving an email with this additional information. But again, it's 3 continuing education units for folks that participate for part 1 and part 2 again in 2 weeks. Any questions, please feel free to email us at ctechny.org at NYU or silver.continuingeducation@nyu.edu. On our following slide here that you see, we do have a short pre-survey for you. Again, this is just more for our own purposes in terms of how to maybe better prepare for part 2. So if you can take the time to just click on the pre-survey link that was sent in by my colleague, take a minute to fill it out. I'm going to go silent for just a little bit. Please click on it, fill it out, and then come back and join us in the chat box. If you can just put done, completed, I'm back, just to give us a heads up that you are back, that would be greatly appreciated. So again, for those that are joining us, please just look into the chat box for the pre-survey link and complete that and come right on back. Thank you. Great, thank you. Appreciate those of you who are letting us know you are completing it. I'm just going to give it a little bit more time. Great, and I also want to recognize that not only do we have folks that are in the field doing the work, but we also have individuals that are looking to further their education, their career, interns, and whatnot. So again, thank you. All right, so I'm seeing a good number of done's and completed. If you haven't finished it, please take the time to do so right now. Should not take too long. And again, it's really helpful for us to have that information. So great. Thank you so much. So I think we are about to get started. We are ready for that. So again, thank you for joining us. My name is Diana Arias with the Community Technical Assistance Center at NYU's McSilver Institute, and I would like to welcome you to today's offering, Youth and Technology, Mental Health Redefined with Dr. Lisa Strom. This two-part offering explores the profound connection between modern technology and youth mental health. In today's webinar, part one, participants will gain an in-depth understanding of how these digital platforms influence behaviors, mental health, and development. So our speaker for today is a clinical psychologist, author, public speaker, and the founder and director of Digital Citizen Academy. She's established Digital Citizen Academy to proactively prevent and educate students, educators, and parents on the issues resulting from technology use and misuse. She has spent more than a decade working with adolescents and families in a private practice. And again, we are so honored and excited to have you with us today, Lisa. So at this point, I'm going to turn it over to you to get us started.
Awesome. Thank you so much. I'm excited to share the wealth and to give all of this information to all of you. And we have a lot to cover. So just a quick background, when I was talking to the team earlier, how I got into the space was not intentional. I was an intern in this JD PhD program, and I was selected by the FBI to be an honors intern in their division of profiling. So I was actually in Quantico taking classes at the BAU, living at the dorms on Quantico's campus with all of the FBI agents. And I had this incredible opportunity to be there. And then I was selected to become a visiting scholar, which meant that they were going to sponsor my dissertation alongside NCMEC, or National Center for Missing and Exploited Children. At the time, we were looking at infant abduction. So my dissertation is actually on the abduction of infants 0 to 1 years of age. But I was there doing that research. It was an incredible learning opportunity. And at that time, it was in 1999, is when Columbine happened. And so I remember sitting in this room with all of these very intense profilers, and we had NSA and CIA, Secret Service, Interpol was there. All of these massive agencies came in because it was such a horrific incident, obviously. And I just remember sitting around as they were bringing in boxes of data that Eric Harris had posted online previous to this happening. And I remember thinking that we missed this. Like, the smartest minds in our country we missed how they were going to use technology. And so I really dove into the psychology of technology and wanted to really understand that despite our best practices and putting stuff out there that we can use for good, how are children going to use it in ways that we didn't anticipate? And so I've spent the breadth of 20 years now in this space. So lots to cover, lots to talk about in it, and happy you're here.
Thank you so much.
Yep.
So for folks, again, as was just mentioned, there is a lot to cover, but we do want to hear from you. So we have a chat question here. What challenges around technology use have you observed in your work with young people? So if you can chat some of that in the interest of time, I think what we'll do is we'll collect some of that, Lisa, and maybe
Keep us going.
Yeah. So again, for everyone, please use the chat in to let us know what are your challenges, so we can certainly try to address those or attend to those. Thank you.
Yeah. And just so also Diane mentioned it earlier, but if you have things that come up, pop it in there so that we can address it later. And if it's something that you want right at that moment to stop me, put that right there. And I am happy to do that as much as I possibly can. I'm starting to see some of the stuff coming in. So all stuff that I'm used to seeing in my clinical practice as well. So our agenda. So we're going to start out and look at the benefits of technology use, because I think that we sometimes forget that there's good and bad in this. And it's very important to talk about some of the positives that we're getting out of it. Obviously, right now, our society is looking at the impact of it. Emotionally, I break it down into these different areas because it's what, as a clinician and as a practitioner and as an advisor, I consult all over the United States on this, but these are kind of the main areas we're going to get into. And then I popped in your own data. You guys are doing a lot of things incredibly well, and you have things on the horizon that I want to speak to. And then obviously the developing issues of AI and deep fakes. So those of you that work around youth or anywhere in the educational system, I, on a weekly basis, have 2 to 3 calls nationally on situations that are happening with teachers, administrators, things like that, where kids are utilizing AI and deepfakes in ways that are causing massive issues. Both criminal, civil litigation is are abounding from it. So I'm just going to talk to you all about just getting you some information on it. So benefits of the technology to me is obvious sometimes for those of us that are in the space. Like, we can use that in very positive ways in terms of connecting to others. A lot of us use things for our clients or our staff or people that we're working with. It allows us to connect and share and feel that we have a group that we're doing. So obviously that connection. And then that safe space for marginalized groups, I cannot speak highly enough to that. And in fact, one of the chapters in the book that you'll receive has an entire chapter on special needs and these marginalized groups that are really historically have not had a place to speak. And it really has been helpful to give them space and somewhere that they can feel secure in these spaces to talk through it. And then obviously amplifying voices. One of the biggest things that I do through our Digital Citizens Academy is this peer program where I'm amplifying their voices. I remind kids that they are the largest technological cohort in history, that it is set up to isolate and silo them from one another, but that when they come together, it amplifies their voice and it allows them to have advocacy and allows them to have decision making in the space. So I think it's really important to understand that we can use that really, really well. Obviously, access to information. Gen Z has never lived without the ability to say, "Hey Siri" or "Hey Google," or look something up. I have a 16 and 17-year-old, so I am fact checked on a regular basis. So that access to information can, be good and bad in certain ways. And it's very humbling to have teenagers in the space. So I am in this as not only a professional, but also as a mom now, working through it. Also, the skill development, their ability to go in and have that math, like Khan Academy is incredible, that you can have actually a classroom of kids that have 32 different special needs in a huge class, and they can go in and have personalized data, like information and data given to them that they need to advance. So that skill development is really, really key. And then also the creativity. There are so many things out there that allow artists to be really creative and artistic. And obviously, when they start to learn how to code and be able to develop those things, that is really kind of in a global economy, super important. And so we have to not be afraid of allowing them to do that. We just have to remind ourselves that we have handed all of this to them without direction and guidelines for the most part. And that's where we get into trouble. And then finally, the last slide, really talking through the mental health aspect, which is why we're here in this call. And so that telehealth platform, there's a lot of different ways to talk about that. Obviously, asynchronous telehealth services are not as good as in person. We're not getting all of the parameters of it, the in-person emotional and even that heuristic connection that we need as humans. But it's better than having nothing. And so I was in Iowa a year ago, I think, and I was driving to this presentation and I thought, where am I? There was like literally people in buggies and carts in Amish country. And, I show up and there's all of these like Amish individuals and I'm like, what do we do? Our kids are using this and we don't really know how to help them. And so you'll see the data on like the social emotional impact. And in those really remote environments, really, we have to use telehealth services to get to them. So it's just changing like a lot of things from a cultural and structural standpoint from our society in total. The confidential support for marginalized youth, very, very important, because a lot of times they do not feel comfortable talking in real life or in person with someone. That stigma is still very real. And although that Gen Z and Gen Alpha are a little bit more open and supportive, it's still a scary proposition for any of you that have gone through that. And then also crisis support tools. We have a slide in the end of like a bunch of different organizations, but it really gives them immediate access to be able to go into those crisis lines and things like that when they really, really, truly need them. So it's there's so much good in it. So I really want to make sure that we're on the page of that. But obviously, it's creating a cultural shift in all of us. And I think I saw pop through a lot of them, like basic human skills and how are we communicating with one another. And so I have this short little video that a producer created for me, and I hope you enjoy it. But it'll be just about 1 minute long.
Oh, it's so nice to all be sitting down together. You can tell me something I did today.
I drew a horsey.
Good for you, son.
I started smoking.
I love you too, sweetheart.
I got a tramp stamp. I'm getting implants. I'm dating your brother.
Uh-huh.
I'm cooking meth in the basement.
Great idea, kiddo. That's why you're so popular at school.
1 billion of us own a smartphone, and we know how addicting it can be.
50% of teens report that they feel addicted to their cell phone. And a third of parents and teens say they argue daily about screen time. It's only lunchtime. They've been on the device for 5 hours, and you're yelling at them again to put it down. Researchers found significant differences in brain chemistry.
The biggest tech firms in the world now are figuring out what they can do to continuously juice people.
So obviously, hopefully you got a little bit of humor in the first part of that. And you can see I had this created for me in right before the pandemic. And now if you look at the statistics, 90% of our 8 billion globally have a smartphone. So that's over 7 billion individuals worldwide have access to smartphones. So it's changing so rapidly that the statistics in some of these videos and they're all very difficult to keep posted. But generally the idea of it's not just our kids, it's also us as adults and how we're managing ourselves at the classroom and the family table, like they were sitting around. But it's definitely something that I will tell you reminds me of back when we're dealing with drug use or alcoholism in the home, and where, can you present yourself out into the public as everything is fine, but basically in the home, people are fighting. So lots of domestic violence situations happening in my clinical practice regarding and around this topic. And typically they're not talking about it in clinics. So we have to be a little bit proactive in talking about it. I'm not going to read through all of this because you all get to download this and it's so much information. But just generally, I wanted to highlight a couple of things. Technology, social media addiction, we all kind of talk about it as an addiction. It's a process addiction. There's no substance on board. So those of us that are in the space, if you're having something like a gambling addiction, which is in the DSM, that's something that they're talking about. It's process addiction. And we see all of these 4 things. There's a compulsive engagement, loss of control, there's a dependence, and it severely impacts our daily life. With adults, it's work and relationships, and kids, relationships and educational that they see. But because it's not listed officially in the DSM-5, sometimes that does actually impact how we can treat it if we're on insurance-based providers provisions in our practices. So I just wanted to highlight that because typically when I'm dealing with social media addiction or technology addiction, and we offer things like digital detox programs and things like that, we can't actually bill for that specific code because that's not what it is. It has to be coded into the response of it because we don't have anything in the DSM, which really in the ICD, we don't have that. So you can't really code for this specifically, but I wanted to give you that background of what it is used as. I talk about it. You'll see it in the book. And when there's going to be a link later, I did 2 separate books. The first book was really kind of a 90-page to hand out to parents to talk about it. And I was very clear in both books that I don't like to call it an addiction, particularly when working with kids, because I just feel kids live up to labels. And so what I talk about is overuse. And that's what much of you have put in there of lack of sleep, they're overusing, they can't disengage. So I talk about it in those terms, because I really truly believe that with some training and some boundaries, we really can turn this around for kids when we give them the information. And I'll talk a little bit about that later, but kind of in excess, control and boundaries are getting over stepped on a regular basis. A lot of times kids will bring their technology into their bedrooms, in their bathrooms. I tell parents a lot of times, or schools a lot of times, like nothing good happens after midnight. That's what I was told. But we didn't have cell phones at the time. So now I say nothing good happens with a cell phone behind a bathroom door or behind a bedroom wall. So keeping the technology out of those areas and things like that, that's typically how we can find out right away if there's a technology overuse problem, is like when we start to restrict kind of where and how they use it and time limits on that. We can see pretty quickly. There's a lot of people that speak out on this issue, and I know Jonathan Haidt, with the anxious generation, and I know that Simon Sinek has talked about a lot of it, but I truly don't know whether or not, from 23 years in the practice of dealing with teenager, I think that we're missing the point that this is more than an identity crisis. This is more than a parenting issue. We have a predatory market from big tech that's coming in, and they're pulling information, and the algorithms are actually coming in and usurping our own core standards as humans. So I'm going to talk to that a little bit, because I do feel like we're kind of losing a lot of ground without understanding the why behind it. And all of these, just so you know, there's two resource slides in the end. So all of these have a link to them or information of where I got them at the back end. So if you ever want to replicate it or look and see where we're getting the data, it's down there. Suicide for this age 10 to 19 still maintains as the second cause of death, and that suicidality is not really moving. There are some counties that I've gone to that it's their primary leading cause of death. Some counties are getting a better handle on it, but it definitely it's extremely impactful in terms of the impulsive nature of a child and having access to these devices that are taking them into these kind of nefarious places. 80% of children under the age of 15 report being exposed either to cyberbullying, sex trafficking, or pornography. Average age in the United States of exposure to pornography, which makes up a huge percentage of that 80%, is at second grade. So active exposure around 8, and chronic viewing starting about 11. And the reason that is because at 8, second grade, that is when our students are handed over the ability to have a device that they can go and do a research project on. They're typically assigned a historic figure, Ponce de Leon, Sir Francis Drake, one of these figures that they're going in and they're searching up, and the porn industry goes in and purchases ad bundling and attaches it to our educational system's core standards in order to expose those kids, which is completely unacceptable. And I work on a daily basis on trying to figure out how we can kind of unwind that, and with some of the biggest tech folks in the world trying to figure out how to solve that. When we talk about trafficking, I want to be really clear that a lot of times people they think about it, we're taking children out of their homes and we're putting them in vans and driving them off places. Trafficking of sex with children also includes the exploitation or taking of their images and trafficking their images. And so a huge amount of the suicides that we see are related to that sexual exploitation, trafficking their images. And so the minute a child posts something about their image, it's trafficked into this other region, and then they start to get extorted for that. And in that case, those kids, and I've seen too many to even, I don't even want to care to share with you how awful those individuals are. But many of the time when the kids are like, I don't have any money, or I can't take any more pictures, they basically tell them to go kill themselves. And it is awful, and it's a business. And it is no longer just kind of bad actors in rooms. It is a massive business. And they're making billions of dollars off of our kids. Self-harm and suicidality. This is a stat from Gaggle. So some of those that you might have that had used that in the past, this is from post-pandemic numbers. What happened was we had our elementary school kids given one-on-one devices during that time. Hard to unwind that. And so what we see is that in the elementary school age, that those kids are starting to get exposed to things. And so self-harming is going up and suicidality is going up. And you can see it very easily attached to that. I'm going to show you a slide right after this that's going to show you how directly it's attached. And then obviously, lastly, the limited self-regulation and susceptibility to peer pressure. Children and adolescents are obviously at increased risk because they don't have that development. And I'm going to go through that a little bit here. So I would say that if you look at Erickson's and stages of psychosocial development, and we can all kind of agree that obviously with technology and the morphine, like things are changing a bit, but these general things I would say is it would be that space of elementary school, middle school, and high school when we're seeing the most exposure. The sexual predators tactics, I see, Cassandra, you asking about that. So typically what they do is they go into social media threads of kids. They pose as a other teen. And oftentimes, I would say 90% of the time, it is a female social media profile that comes in. It starts to talk to the boy that is not private, and it'll say, oh, I go to this neighboring school. I saw you here. Like I saw you on, we're friends here. So they go into an unprivate account, and then they are able to spiderweb off of that. So even if I have a private account, if I have a friend that's not private, some of these bad actors will go in those unprivate accounts. They'll go in and they'll be like, oh, like I'm friends with Diana. And so because I know Diana, I trust her, you must be trustworthy. And so kids they trust very quickly on these social media platforms. And so boys are getting attention from what they see as a profile of a cute girl. And then the girl says, can we date? Typically there's like between 7 to 10 different exchanges before an image comes over to a boy of a naked body, boobs, whatever it is. Once the boy gets that, obviously they're usually between 12 and 15, and that's a pretty exciting day for them. And so typically what they do is the girl says, it's your turn now. Can you send me a picture? The boy then gives a picture of their genitalia. And then once that genitalia is sent over, it immediately switches off and says, I own you now, da, 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 da. I have all of your friends. I know where you go to school. And so it's very, very calculated. And so once the kids do that, that's the most vulnerable period of when a child is going to take their life because they don't know what to do. And we're not telling them how normal that or how often that happens. And so we have to really kind of get into that space to do that. Thank you for asking me to go into that. So elementary school, so I'm going to overlay this. So in the United States specifically, students are getting their first technological device in elementary school. A family's giving them an old device. They're actually giving them something that has access to the entire World Wide Web, obviously, with that device, even if it doesn't have cell service because it has Wi-Fi. And so you have to think, like at that age, if these kids have access to it, psychosocially, they're going through and figuring out, am I good or not? Am I making right decisions? And they're out trying to test themselves against the world, trying to get results to show that they're capable and they're a good person and that they're competent at things. So overlay that as an elementary student where you start posting things online and you start getting things like kill yourself or ostracized or kicked out of social groups, or you can see on these social media platforms that your friends are all hanging out and you're not invited. So that first early influence of am I good or not? And if it gets solved as I'm inferior, now we're starting to get a social emotional ding at that elementary school age. When they move into middle school, as most of us know, if you've worked in that space, you will see the fact that middle schoolers are highly emotional. There's hormones on board, and they're really trying to figure out, who am I? Like what group do I belong to? So all of those things, like, am I a jock? Am I emo? Am I drama? Am I band? Am I, so those clicks still exist, but they're a little bit fuzzy because we have social media and we can like kind of go in between these different roles. So trying to figure out who I am becomes like comparing yourself to one another. Am I getting accepted in these groups? Am I not? And even if there's ideological differences, you see that kids are like, oh, like this is my friend, but it's not as clear cut as it once was, which is great. I mean, this generation is really, really open and supportive of all, but it's also really confusing because what I see happening, and again, I've been doing this for over 20 years, is that we're losing the influence of the family. So typically it was family first, our peer group or educational influence second, and third was community church, whatever that is, our neighborhood. Those were the spheres of influence. It has flipped over, and the number one influence in this age group is now teen peers that are influencers online. And so you have to imagine that if you're being told that you need to be a certain cohort, or you need to be on TikTok alt or something like that, we are no longer having a prioritization of that cultural and spiritual and emotional and all of those things that we are from our own communities. It's going into this global environment, which is extremely confusing for kids. And then finally, when we get into high school, obviously, I would say that statistically, our kids are not dating as much anymore. They're not having sex as much anymore. Somebody put in the chat earlier, like just basic communication skills are dropping off. That's all very true. But if you look at kind of high school and going into college, will I be loved or will I be alone? It really takes being vulnerable and letting your guard down. So backtrack with me, middle school, I post, I get rejected, I post, nobody likes me, I'm really not getting as much attention as I need to. Then I go back to elementary school, like where are they getting confidence to be able to go out there and be vulnerable and trust that they are good people and that they are worthy of love? And so that's where we're kind of seeing that incel group. And if you haven't heard of them, I can even do a whole talk on incels, but involuntary celibate groups. But there's this huge area about like being able to be honest with our emotions and being vulnerable and all of those things. So this is kind of the why behind what we're going to see in terms of what is happening. I will say the statistics here are always correlational. So when I'm talking about this, keep that in mind. I am not a huge fan. Drop my timer. I'm not a huge fan of Mark Zuckerberg because he stands up in front of Congress and he says, "We got it. You know, there's no scientific evidence that shows that this is a problem with our kids." I'm here to tell you that we will never have scientific evidence that is evidence-based in the way that he's talking about, because we're never going to pass an IRB to be able to put our students or our kids through these different components. But what we do have is massive data on correlational, both in the United States and internationally. So I'm very confident to tell you that it definitely is, it is something that impacts them. So if you see here, the percent of high school students who felt sad or hopeless, the top line blue, sad or hopeless, the bottom line suicidal, right in, if we all remember, 2007, 2008, 2009, we start to see a dip. That's when we had that massive recession. And so what I can only aspire to assume, and when I look at all of these studies in context together, is that people were losing their jobs and they're spending more time at home. And so being together and having that unity and having to come together from families and friends and supporting one another actually reduced our sadness and hopelessness. 2009 hits, Instagram comes out. 2010 hits, we've got Snapchat. And if anybody could guess, I'm sure 1,000 of you would write into the chat box what you think was released in 2016, 2017. And what we have there is TikTok. So as you can hear, yep, exactly. So as you can see in that, it is very influential with our kiddos. And then if I go on to the next slide, and I look at actual self-harm and I look at actual suicides, you can see that it is definitely where we are getting a lot of information with our kids. Again, obviously correlational, but we are pretty, I wish I could go back to the 1990s up to 2000 and show you that we were very, very stable until we hit 2009, 2010. You're going to have to take my word for it, but I'm happy for you to go in and like do your own research. But I just wanted to really drive home that these products do influence our kiddos. in a very significant way. It's a quick video.
I'm sad. I feel fat. I'm stressed. I feel ugly. I'm not hungry anymore. I'm so tired all the time. I'm just having a really hard time. And I don't know what to do anymore.
So I'm sorry about the audio on that. I know some of you, we tested a little bit and the music wasn't playing quite the same way, but generally just wanted to give a picture. We talk a lot about statistics and we talk a lot about like what it looks like, but I thought that that was a really good demonstration of where you could actually see a video of what the day-to-day is going on. And I'll leave it to CTAC to see whether or not you can have a link to the videos, or if I need to figure out where this I sourced it, I'll figure that out for you on the back end with them before our next training when we go back for the solutions. So the emotional signs, obviously, depression, anxiety, I think that we're all very adept to understand. I talk about this as a sliding scale when I'm talking to families and to kids. Again, labels of diagnoses versus the mechanisms that get us there. Children, obviously, from an anxiety standpoint and a depression standpoint, they're kind of a 24/7 cycle for them. So I remember as a kid, I had a really hard time as a child, and was severely bullied, but I knew that when I got off that bus and I got to my home, like I was kind of safe. They couldn't come after me at that time. And we just don't have that downtime or that safe time for kids, and they're fearful to let it go. So it just gets amplified very quickly. And that's what's shown in the statistics for that. And then one of the ones that we don't talk about all the time is grief. And I think that as adults, we talk about grief as like losing a loved one or losing someone that we, divorce or something that's like a major life episode for us. But for kids, like their systems of like just losing a friend group or being ostracized from a friend group or being actually ridiculed online creates this grief state for them. And so I think that it's important to kind of add that into kind of our clinical responses when we're talking to kids, because a lot of times we're kind of missing some of those signs when I get kids into my practice that nobody's really talked to them about. The brain stuff for me is always like super exciting to share. And obviously the Surgeon General's advisory coming out has been like really great at amplifying it. These are all the way back to 2013, 2011. I'm telling you globally for 20 years, we've had evidence to show that there are brain anatomy alterations that are happening in our children and that they're actually decreasing their ability to function in society. One of the great studies that we saw really showed that volume and that shrinkage of tissue. So just like a muscle that we don't use, it shrinks. gray matter is really where all of our processing occurs. So if you can imagine a child who is spending, and the studies are looking at kids that are spending more than 2 hours online in what I call kind of junk tech. You know, there's tech as a tool where we use it creatively and educationally, but using tech as a junk food for social media, gaming, things like that, that doesn't add to our creative or educational intellectual processes can create damage. And so that's what we're seeing in these studies. So gray matter gets impacted, and also white matter. So what was really interesting is that the white matter is truly the superhighway of our brain. And so if you imagine you're sitting in a classroom and a teacher's trying to send you a concept, you're having to auditorily process it. That white matter is supposed to take that information and take it to the regions of your gray matter that you need to process that information, and then be able to give it back through the white matter into a space where you can raise your hand and answer that question. And if you can imagine, if all of that is impacted and damaged, kids are going to become less academically functioning at lower levels and things like that. So the science behind it is terrifying. One of the biggest things that I think you can do in clinical practice is talk to the kids about this, show them the studies, show them these pictures, and they really do change the way that they feel about using technology. I've been doing it a really long time, and they are grateful to understand, and they actually get a little bit frustrated that no one's told them that before. So neurochemically, so not just structurally, neurochemically, we also see changes. So in a healthy brain, what you see is these robust areas of dopamine, and that's that reward processing. And you see that the fact that dopamine is like, that's where we're going to get like our, we love, a pizza, right? We're going to go get a slice, or what are we doing? Like our healthy brain knows, and we get excited about it, and we impact it. This is a picture of a brain of a meth addict. So those are those people this is a substance addiction, obviously, but you see how the decrease of that dopamine is in there because they have actually impacted those receptors in the brain from a neurochemical standpoint. And that's because it's gotten overloaded by that information. And when you look at this brain, which is a little bit different mapping because it's later, but that dopamine, again, not super robust, starting to break down. This is internet addiction. And specifically, this is a brain of pornography, excessive use of pornography. So again, like in my clinical practice, I have now young men in their early 20s that are buying Cialis and like ED medications because they have had chronic viewing of porn for over a decade. And a lot of it has to do with these neurochemical changes that are happening in their brain, that they are no longer have that excitatory processing in there. The good news is, and we're going to talk about that on the second part, neuroplasticity is there, and we can rebuild some of these things, but we have to understand the why if we're going to treat properly. So both from a structural standpoint and a neurochemical standpoint, our kiddos and our young adults are being impacted on these areas. And so we have to think about it the same way as like we talk about maybe having an addict that's a substance addict of alcohol or drugs, and they come in our office and we say, all right, I'm glad that you understand that that's not good for you. I'm glad that you decided to stop. It might be a Tuesday. On Wednesday, we're like, you're good, right? Like you're all fine. It's not how it works. And we all know that because their brains are damaged, and it's going to take time for their brains to come online. They're going to have to learn new behaviors. It is very similar for technology addiction. We just don't see it, and we don't understand it so much. So hopefully this is the beginning of us trying to look at it. And here is a SPECT scan. Those of you that know Daniel Amen, I've been on his podcast a couple of times, but I went through his process actually, which was fascinating. But they basically take a SPECT scan and fMRI of your brain. They look at it both from a structural standpoint like this, and they look at it from an attention standpoint. And you can see a normative healthy brain doesn't have any like insults or holes in it. The middle one is a brain that was a heroin user. And then on the right-hand side is a brain that has been a chronic porn viewer. And so these are the cleanest scans that he had offered me. He has hundreds of thousands of scans. And if any of you are interested in research, they have an amazing resource for identifying kind of different areas. If you were doing practicums, I saw that there were some students on here, but I'm super fascinated with the brain. So obviously, brain damage. We're going to see decreased test scores, lack of focus, the emotional dysregulation, increased anxiety, increased suicidality, because obviously they're not able to regulate their emotions and they're impulsive. And then their behavioral consequences of that lack of respect, or some of the things that they're doing out in society or to others, that we're doing it. All right, so social impact. I know we're kind of getting through, but I want to make sure we have time for questions at the end. I see so many good ones coming through. So social impact, friendship strain. It is just a new world. I talk, and there's a resource online. I did a TED talk on self-worth, and I talk about how, we used to be able to say, like, in a classroom of 27 kids, I knew kind of my place in that. In a school, even if it's 2,000 kids or 3,000 kids, I kind of knew my social standing in that. In this global economy for kids, it's really hard to find your self-worth because there's so many other people that you're attached to and connected to. And so friendships get strained over that because you're no longer kind of being present in those like cohorts or those micro systems that are in our backyard, and we're looking at and trying to find things outwardly. Family stress is a huge one. There's a lot of marital strife. There's a lot of family strife. Particularly right now, we're in this kind of disconnect where we have digital natives of these kids growing up with immigrants that are on, a parenting side of it. And we still remember what it was like to go outside and play until the lights came on. Our kids don't, that most of them don't, and I think that in New York, I do say that most of your kiddos are protected. I brought my daughter to New York for a college tour recently, and there's just a ton of kids in the metro and like at the train station. And it was just so interesting. She was like, these kids are just like traveling by themselves, Mom. And I was like, yeah, that's what you do. And so, she was all upset with me because I was making her map us through the city and all of the things. But again, like not everybody has that experience. And I love the fact that, you out there do have a little bit more with kids doing that. And then finally, educational struggles we spoke to, but it is really, really hard to be able to get the attention of kids nowadays. I truly believe there is a impending implosion of the educational system because we're no longer needing to teach fund of knowledge. We now need to teach access to knowledge, and we need to teach them how to access correct knowledge. And so, the fact that we had to learn World War I, World War II, who these explorers were, and we memorized that information. The kids nowadays don't see the value in that when they can just say, hey, Google, blah, blah, blah. So we're going to have to see that, and that educational struggle is real because we're not doing it in the same way in how those go. The comparison of self-worth, obviously, when you look at Instagram and you look at where they are, to me, that's probably the most damaging in terms of self-worth. And I said, I did a talk on that, but it really truly is comparing yourself to folks that it's not realistic. So those of you that haven't seen the documentary, and maybe one of the CTAC folks can write into the chat, but there is a really good documentary called Fake Famous. And there's another good one that's called Social Animals. Obviously, or hopefully you've all heard of Social Dilemma. That's the third one. But Fake Famous is really truly a documentary that came out right before the pandemic, and it ended when the pandemic hit. They filmed all the way up to it, but they take people that actually have no following and fake famous them. And you see these three individuals, two gentlemen and a woman, and two of them fall. I'm not going to tell you who, but fall and cannot handle the pressure and the stress. But what it shows you is how fake those posts are. All the way down to the fact that at one point they're holding up a toilet seat, taking photographs and pretending that they're on a private plane. So it really, really nails down the home of what that is. And of course, Social Dilemma was like a massive one that kind of shows the algorithmic nature of what social media does. So definitely take a look at that. The cyberbullying and peer pressure, I think it just amplifies everything, from what I can see from my perspective. And I think that kids don't always understand what it is. So it's easy to think that if I go up to a kid and I punch him in the back or I steal his lunch, that I'm bullying him. But when you're online and you're behind the safety of your own phone and you're saying hurtful things to other people, it definitely changes the mechanism of how that bullying occurs. And the audience matters, who that audience is, if they're sensitive or not sensitive, or all of those things. I had a young girl who has a type of dwarfism, and she's had surgeries in her legs, multiple surgeries, like 6 separate surgeries, and so she had some height, but she's under 4 feet tall, and so generally she looks normative except for the height, and so people like start to tease her and text her things and post things on there, and I just frankly told her, I was like, create a thing on what your type of dwarfism is, tell them like, here's what this is. I know you're not trying to be rude, but this is why it's hurtful to me when you say that. And she started sending that out and handing out these little pieces of paper to people. And like, voila, like it just stopped. Right. So I don't think that kids always understand. I think some kids do, but some kids don't. And so we have to talk to them and use that peer pressure and that need to kind of follow one another with positive ways in these spaces as well. The behavioral impacts of technology is a gateway. Again, I'm going to go through different areas that I see. Each one of these we could do a full talk on, but the gateway to sex addictions, as I said, starts really early. Average age, I tell parents, the minute you hand your child a device that has access to Wi-Fi, they will probably and likely be exposed to pornography. It's just the truth of the matter. It horrifies parents, but it is very true. And so we have to talk to our kids differently and our families differently about it. But these are some of the ways that kids are getting introduced to it. Snapchat, they talk about premium Snapchat, but they have the ability now to monetize off of those Snapchat accounts. The Live Me definitely is one that we went through and did a special on with a market in LA. Bill Malusian, who's now out in New York in your market, was part of that. And we shut down 600,000 accounts for kids under the age of 10 that were on there. But again, if you haven't heard of these things, I would suggest like popping in, just taking a look so that you understand some of the areas that kids are going. OnlyFans is obviously a payment system. It's like an Instagram for payment. And so posting pictures in bathing suits and things like that, kids can make real money real fast. And they're doing it. And parents don't typically know about it. So kind of figuring out whether or not there's a mechanism there, particularly in our communities that are underserved or under lower SES, it is definitely a way that they are funding their way through life. And then finally, PlayStation, which probably many of us that have kids have allowed them to play on. They actually have now in their PlayStation 5 have introduced a hidden internet browser, which has easy access into Pornhub. In fact, I will show you that there are ways to use VR porn on PlayStation. There's 100,000 videos of VR porn being produced every month. It's probably higher now, I would have to say. But it is very, very easy for our kiddos to get in and be able to access that. So it's recognizing it, being able to ask. When I'm in clinical practice, I always say, what age were you exposed to pornography first? Like, have you ever been exposed or played with friends? Like, so it's just, I just make the assumption that it's already happened for our kiddos because it truly is so easy for them to get into these spaces. And one of the things before I go into gaming with sex addictions is I will tell you that the erectile dysfunction issues is a real thing in our young men, which causes a whole bunch of other issues with them because that goes to confidence and all of those other things. But the other thing I would say is that we're seeing a lot more cases of pedophilic behavior. And so if you are now inserting and teaching and showing kids like these sexual relationships at that very young age, typically just like a fetish is formed, that attachment to sexual interest attaches at that age time. So I'm seeing men that are aging out into their 30s, 20s and 30s that are still normatively attracted to 12 to 15-year-olds of age because that's when they were first introduced to sexual behaviors and sexual concepts and things like that. So it's not everybody, obviously, as well as none of this is always everybody, but I'm just seeing that as part of the trend there. And so it's having conversations about what's normative and not normative for them. Gaming obviously is a huge issue. We want kids to be able to game safely. I'm going to show some content and I'll get you some resources that you can hand out to your families. But these are some of the most popular ones that we see often. I'm going to show a video of one that says it's mature 17 and over. Both of the videos I'm about to show you, I pulled off of YouTube. So a lot of times parents are like, oh, I would never buy my kids this content. But because we have streamers and they're putting it on YouTube, kids don't even actually have to have the devices themselves. They just have to have access to Wi-Fi. So I'm just going to show 20 seconds of this because it is pretty intense.
This is a warning. If you are easily scared, if the sight of blood makes you feel, if you have an unusual fear of trees, deer, deers, deadites, or chainsaws, this game may be too much for you.
So obviously lots of blood, lots of action, all of those things. It highlights the amygdala. It gets it really ramped up. It gets everything in the brain. It takes about 45 to 60 minutes for them to come down from that when you're looking at an fMRI scan of that. This one is Grand Theft Auto. This is from Garrett Sutton. He, at last check when I pulled this, which was probably 3 years ago, was making hundreds of thousands of dollars every month by followers of young boys. And so I just wanted you to hear the language that our kiddos are hearing. And again, this is something that is very accessible that I pulled just right off of YouTube.
What's going on, guys? Garrett here on the Jobless Gamers channel. If you're new to my channel, make sure you hit that subscribe button and join the Jobless Gamer family today because I do upload daily GTA 5 and GTA Online content. With that said, today we're taking a look at first-person prostitution. That's right. We're getting a prostitute today. Gonna pick her up as you guys see in the car right now.
So in this like little thing, he's talking about Michael. I think that it goes on a little bit longer. Michael's a married man. Who cares? The man has needs. He's got this woman. We don't know her name, but that's okay. She's got a job to do. So the misogyny and the introduction of how transactional these things are and how humans don't matter in these exchanges, to me is like, this is getting piped into the brains and the souls of our children. And so when I see kids in my practice, I will tell you that it is a regular occurrence that I have a girl telling me that the cost of her getting a ride home from a friend is a hand job or some sort of sexual favor for the guy. And so I'm kind of trying to like understand kind of why this Me Too movement has not hit our kids. But if you overlay the exposure that they have in just very simple games, and even in innocuous games like Roblox. So hopefully all of you know about Roblox or have heard about it. And those of you who work with really young children, it's supposed to be super fun. And most parents, when I go out and give speeches on this, I had an auditorium, we had like 700 attendees, and there's parents there. And I said, how many of you let your children on Roblox? You know, I would say at least 500 of them raise their hands. I was like, all right, hands up. How many of you realize that Roblox is more than a game and actually has 40 million different experiences? And like all of the hands came down. So I'm going to just show you a quick like little snippet of how Roblox is actually set up. It is actually open source, so anybody can go in and create a game and post it on there. And so as recently as last week, there was a huge issue, if anybody didn't see it in the news, that they lost I think $2 billion in shares when it came out that these XYZ experiences, these are all sexual experiences that kids can go into. They may or may not know that they're sexual experiences because when you're in one game, you can go into the other. But as you can see, Vibe Place, where you can hang out and do those things, you had to be 4 and up. Most of them don't have age groups. This one is all ages. You look down and it talks about yum and super happy face. Like they use this different language that we don't as adults always recognize of what those are. But just most recently, some of the experiences that got shut down was Party at Diddy's Place, Welcome to Epstein Island. So it's very clear what is happening in this very juvenile, should be an ability for kids to be safe while they're gaming online. And I show it to you because I think it's important that we understand kind of where they're saying. And I'm not saying gaming's not bad. We just have to give the tools to our families and our kids to do it safely. One of the biggest issues that we see from mostly Instagram, also Snapchat, everybody is now putting in these abilities to put stories on to the socials, is the hashtags and the ability to follow those, and young girls following in and getting into these eating disorder situations. I am actually serving as a testifying expert in the federal litigation against big tech. It was a very critical decision on my part, understanding I'm going against $1 trillion industry, but I've had kids that I've had to attend funerals for, and it is sometimes something that they cannot come back from. It creates a lifetime of struggle, particularly when I'm starting to see disordered eating and children all the way as young as 7 and 8 that are dealing with eating disorders now. The pandemic actually created a massive influx of young men that were introduced to disordered eating. I don't know from a clinical perspective why that happened at that time, but you've got a lot of guys in that middle school, high school age now that are like trying to get the 6-pack abs and do all the things. And again, like most of those are filters that people can put on from those influencers, but the kids don't really recognize that fake part of it. That's why that fake famous one is so good to watch. But definitely is a huge issue. Self-harm, massive. I showed you the statistic earlier, 2 in 5 females, 1 in 7 males. That is, from a regional perspective, very different. If you go into California, it's like 3 in 5 females and 3 in 7 males. You go into like more rural areas, it's not as high, but generally you've got a huge percent of the population starting to engage in self-harm. And typically it's introduced as a normative space, and it gives them belonging as well. So it's very different than when I started practicing, where I would think that somebody who is self-harming might have tendencies of borderline or bipolar behavior. Oftentimes it has nothing to do with that. Oftentimes it has to do with that dysregulation, and it has to do with those things that we don't always see outwardly. One of the things I will tell you, the one on the right was a picture that was sent to me from one of my patients, and she said, "I found my people." The one on the bottom was the one that I just pulled off of an online Instagram post. But it was really telling, like working with and talking to some of the kids in these communities of self-harm, and they saying, you know, a lot of times adults come in and they want to fix it and erase them and do, you know, all of these things. And for them, a lot of times those scars represent winning a battle against depression or suicidality or things like that. So it's really having open discussion in the when you do find it, not tiptoeing around it, and having conversations about it, particularly if they're doing it in areas where you can see it overtly. But there are massive amounts of postings that happen. And for those of you that haven't heard of the Molly Russell case, probably most pronounced, it was a UK case. And she basically started following, you know, she was depressed. She started following an account, and then the algorithm switched on her, and it took her from the minute she got that device and social access to social media at 13, I think it was within 9 months she had taken her life. And you saw in her personal diary, handwritten diary, that the flux of the images and the algorithm actually started to influence what she was feeling about herself. So everything that we think is happening when the kids are on it was shown in that. Gateway to substances. I think everybody knows about Snapchat and Snap Maps. I try to show this as often as I can. This penny shows 2 milligrams is a lethal dose of fentanyl, and how tiny that is. And that's why our kiddos oftentimes are dying very, very quickly. They're buying oxycodone or things like that that they think that are laced with fentanyl. And obviously it's very easy to die from a very small dose. In Arizona, we are obviously a border state over here, and we have now carfentanil that's coming in at massive levels. And if you look at the lethal dose of heroin versus fentanyl versus carfentanil, carfentanil is an amplified version of fentanyl. I'm not really certain of the mechanism or the reason for adding such lethal doses to these products, but it definitely is causing a situation in our community here. And so one of the things I always say is to get in your practice and find a way for you to be able to get grants and things like that, so you can get Narcan doses for your office staff or things like that, in case you have a kid who you know is struggling with it. Behavioral signs, disrespect, hopelessness, recklessness. There's on TikTok, I know for the recklessness part, there's challenges all of the time. A couple of years ago, they had one that you were supposed to go in and break down things at the school and steal things and all of those kind of things. And because it's for views, they don't really attach it to kind of that oppositional defiant disorder that we're going to actually go in and say, like, this isn't normal. And in fact, it's them being reckless because they're so unhinged and they're not attached to their communities and the people that are around them and those kind of things. But these are kind of the main three areas I would say that I would lean into seeing the most. And then generally in practice, I would say, all of those different areas, it's important just to remember that intellectually, thoughtfully, their physical health and their souls of, like, really truly, are we getting that whole picture of them? Are they slowing down enough to actually be vulnerable and share what their true needs are? And so I always just take a minute. This is a image that I have on my screen. And so when I'm in clinical practice and I'm seeing kids, it's the first thing that I see when I open up my computer, and it just kind of grounds me and centers me to just remember that this has to be a holistic approach, not judgment, but find them where they are and really understand how do we get them back to center in these spaces. So quick chat stop of what are some of the issues that you've seen from the impact of technology in your practices that you serve, and give you a few minutes to type that in before we go on. But we're almost to the end.
Yeah, I think what we could do, Lisa, is have folks chat that in, and if we have time towards the end, we can revisit there, or if not, for part 2.
Okay. All right. So one of the biggest issues I see right now, and there's a lot of funding around this that I'm getting pulled into services and things like that, is AI and deepfakes. So if all of you need resources and things like that, I recommend you looking at grants and things like that for your own communities, because there is a ton out there. The first thing that I want to say is understand what AI is. So truly it's a spectrum, right? So assisted intelligence, or AI, is where humans are learning from each other. We're putting in those, so think ChatGPT, we're putting that part in there. It's assisting us to create better outlines or things like that. Augmented intelligence is really where AI is kind of taking on tasks on our behalf. Some of the things that we see in augmented intelligence that we're seeing already deployed are like in radiology departments and things like that, where it's augmenting our human ability to look at those tasks. So in a massive system in New York, you think through how many x-rays and images that you have on a day-to-day basis. Imagine that you are having an augmented ability to have computers go in, identify those things, and when they have a hit that looks like a break or something that's injured in a body, then it goes over to the radiologist, and that human at the end makes that decision for them. So that's what augmented intelligence, as an example, is being used for. The part that everybody's really nervous about, as am I, is the autonomous intelligence. And we talk about that as being sentient, where you've got some of these computer systems and robots that are actually thinking for themselves and owning themselves. And some of the early cases where you see some of these AI chatbots and things like that start to get very personal and like protective of themselves and things like that. That's the part that we're all trying to get our hands on. I think that you can, the tech industry themselves agrees, right? Bill Gates, Elon Musk, like, it doesn't matter where you are in the spectrum. All of the top guys in this space are very, very, very nervous about the autonomous intelligence and how we're going to manage that and stop that. That's really the continuum of AI, and we kind of live in the assisted for general public population, and that augmented intelligence is where we're kind of in between those two areas. The reason why deep fakes and AI work, I always show this to people when I'm trying to explain it, but most of us, if you haven't seen this before, but take a second and look to the left in the image on the left. How many, if you type in what you think that image is, just a couple of you, if you could type it in, and what does that look like to the left of you? Yeah. So duck, rabbit, and then on to the right, I see some of you talking about whether or not it's a vase or a face, right? So the Jasto rabbit duck and the Rubin vases, sorry. Those are two optical illusions that our brain goes in and completes it for it. So if I would have said to you, how many of you see the rabbit on the left? You're definitely going to see a rabbit. How many of you see the faces on the right versus a vase or a pedestal? We can morph our anticipation of what it is and misperception of things. And that's how deep fake works. So there's photo deep fakes, there's audio deep fakes, there's video deep fakes. So there's all different types of these deep fakes that are out there. This is one, I'm not going to play the video for time, but this is Jim Carrey on Alison Brie's body. And this caused a whole bunch of controversy in in SAG, but Jim Carrey didn't agree to this and Alison Brie didn't agree to it, but he's sitting there talking to a host on television, and it looks as though that is Jim Carrey's body on it. That's what our kids are now have front and center, the ability to go and do. So I pulled a few of them just to share with you all. YouCam Perfect is a beauty camera. This basically at 4 years old, you have access to go in and you can see, I can enhance myself. I can do whatever I want to quote unquote beautify myself, obviously identifying that maybe you aren't pretty enough yourself. A funny story, I was giving a speech in front of a teenage audience, and I had this line of kids, and this 12-year-old came up, she was 7th grader, and she's like, I just want to tell you how brave you are. And I thought, well, there's like 700 kids in this auditorium. It is kind of brave to talk in front of teenagers. And she's like, no. And I talked to her about like public speaking. She said, no. She's like, I Googled you and all of your pictures are unfiltered. I thought, wow, it's a new definition of being brave in society today. So it's just so normative for them to like put things out there that aren't just raw photos of themselves. So face swap videos and deep fakes. This is hitting schools and administrations. Again, 4 years old. There's really no restrictions for our kids to go on there. So there's been many, many cases where you start to see videos pop up. And then obviously X-ray, removing clothes and pranks. Here you have to be 9. And so, I suggest you go into the App Store and kind of like play around and look at the different ones that are on here. But I do think that there's definitely some issues here that obviously we can probably all agree on. The ones that are a little bit more upsetting or concerning to me are the AI role plays. If you haven't heard about the case of the 14-year-old out of Orlando who took his life to be with his AI companion role play character, that is happening on a very regular basis. I have multiple kids in my practice that are attached and connected into these role play characters that they have real relationships with. So there's a ton of the one that was the 14-year-old was exposed to was character AI. But like I said, there's a ton of apps online that you can do this with. I've had kids lost scholarships because they're spending more time with their role play character friends than they are going to classes in university. So it's a pretty big issue. And then the one on the right is an example of Pocket Girl is an example of how you have these apps. Like they basically, this is a first and best virtual girl simulator game. You have a real girl in her flesh. You can give her commands, try to discover every possible actual action she can do. It will be like having a personal lady with you. Obviously, you can command her to do sexual things and all of those. Perhaps why they want you to be 17 with that one. But definitely those things exist and they're out there. And again, like I would just say, like when we have a child presenting to us, it doesn't mean that all of them are being exposed to all of this, but really truly wanted to give you a breadth of it. And just understand kind of the influence that big tech has globally over our kiddos is really kind of the point of what I'm doing in this talk for sure today. I pulled up some of your data. I thought it was super interesting. Not all of it is completely up to date, but 38% of the city's high school students reported sad or hopelessness in the past year, and they've given up their usual activities. It's a pretty high percentage. That was like really post-pandemic. I don't really know whether or not those have changed so much since then, but it was really hard, like I said, I don't know if it's every other year that you guys pull data, but I couldn't find anything past this. Persistently sad and hopeless increased from 21 to 29% for boys and 36 to 57% for teen girls. It definitely is trending in the wrong direction in terms of how we're doing this. So I think that probably like the New York high schoolers are representative of like kind of just nationally as well. But I wanted to give you your statistics as much as I could. The drug overdose rates have increased 196%. Obviously, opioid overdose rates have gone up for everyone. 85% of your drug overdose in the state. That's just generally not just kiddos. But that's a 260% increase over the last 10 years in that data. So again, representative of what the rest of the world is facing. And then I always like to take an opportunity to kind of show some of the kids that I've come across and the families and the stories that we didn't get to in time. And I think it's really important that we talk about all the stats and we're talking about all the things, but these are real kids and real families that are dealing with these situations. It's what keeps me up at night. And it really definitely is heartfelt that I truly want to be a mechanism of you going out there and taking this data and like spreading more positivity and like solutions out there. Gabriel on the left was 8 when he took his life. He was involved in a bullying situation at school that continued at home. And he ended his life. And Jamal on the right, who was a kid trying to figure out whether or not he belonged in the LGBT community and was kind of testing that out at 9 years old, talking to some friends about it online. And they turned and like really ridiculed him, and he then took his life. So it's getting younger and younger, and it just is terrifying to me that we can't get there fast enough. So I just wanted to give you a little bit of the kiddos in the middle of all the data. This is your New York City. This is residential populations age 5 to 17. And I would say that if you look at overall prevalence, it says that social media, 54%. And this is really kind of those younger, this is 8 to 12 years of age. So 54% of 8 to 12-year-olds from this study show that they actually in 2023 were exposed to it. You look at the bottom and you look at the social media use and anxiety diagnoses. If they use social media, 16.43%, do not use social media, 12.16%. And then I think that the use in depression on the very, very bottom, using social media, 2.64%, do not use social media, 3.69%. So the statistics for 8 to 12-year-olds, a little bit muted, not very different between the two. But when you go and push on into the teenage years, so this is where kids can legally actually be on these platforms, 13 to 17 years of age. Now it bumps all the way up to 92.83% of those kiddos are online. And then you go down and look at, okay, social media use and anxiety, and these are diagnoses. So remember we talked about like not everybody qualifies for a diagnosis, but these are actual diagnoses. 26.8% of those with an anxiety diagnosis use social media, only 9% do not. And then you look at the depression diagnosis, yet again, 13.84% do not use it, is 4%. So the statistics are very telling in your own state, in New York City specifically, but I know not everybody's there, but it definitely is, again, this is where I'd like to get all this data and really just put boxes and boxes of it in front of Mark Zuckerberg and tell him to explain why he thinks that there's not scientific evidence. Anyway, so pending legislation, you guys are on the right track. You definitely are going in and trying to figure out how to manage the AI and the deep fakes and the harassment that's happening. So there's all these pending litigation or pending legislations that you can go in. A lot of it's tied to litigation that's occurred in the state. But if you want to get into that policy stuff, and definitely I wanted to include those bills for you so you can go in and support those folks behind you. I was super excited that you guys had a bill passed by the governor that prohibits unlawful dissemination of publication of intimate images created digitally. So that means that they don't even have to be actual pictures, but they can create like the deep fakes. And if it's sexually explicit depictions, that that you have the ability to prohibit that. Our state took a very similar bill. We put it all the way up and our governor vetoed it, stating that there was privacy concerns. So we live a lot closer to California and Silicon Valley than you do. So I don't know if that's what the difference is, but anyway, we've got to really figure that out. But it looks like you guys are kind of on the right trend. And again, this information is super important to be able to show that. And I put this up here because you all are doing an incredible job of including children's voices in this. For us, the peer program that we do is so important. And one of the things this little girl wrote is peer-to-peer support. We've got to get the kids in here supporting most of that on that. So for part 2, I will tell you this QR code you can scan right now. That'll give you a link to my entire book download. But they're going to put in the chat right here, the section 3. Just pick one of the following chapters. Everybody's super busy and I understand that. I of course want to give everything to everybody, but you're very welcome to download the full book if you have people that you want to share it with. I do not write books because I want to hide them away. I want people to get the data and the information out there. So I'm 100% happy to share that with whomever you think. And then obviously our foundation supports the ability to gift that out. If I can be of any service to you or if anybody needs extra service, we do that on our end. But I think that that's it. I think that I went a little bit long, but we have 10 minutes instead of 15 left for questions to get to. And I know it was a ton of information. So thank you for doing that. I did see one question that came in was talking about the rhetoric of incels. And I am also very sensitive to that. And I appreciate, I think it was Cassandra who put that in there. I appreciate you bringing that up. I want to be really clear. Not everything that I speak to is obviously global. But I'm just trying to highlight some of the different things that happen. And I really, truly put the kids first. As you do, I walk alongside of them. So my heart really goes out to those that struggle, and we've got to figure it out in ways that are empathetic and emotionally sensitive to everybody involved. So all of your feedback is really, really helpful. And I'm hoping, even if we can't get to all the questions, if somebody from CTAC can capture the webinar chat, I am happy to go in and pop in and do some responses in there, and you all can send it out to them on the other end as well, so we don't miss anyone. Oh yeah, the QR code is right there.
Yeah, no, thank you so much, Dr. Schulman. A very informative webinar. There are a lot of questions. I don't think, again, we'll get through all of them, but there is a part 2. If you are here, you are certainly registered and have been invited to part 2. I think a couple of comments that came through, and a lot for folks that are behavioral providers, everyone on the line, but also for parents and just, I think, collectively as society, right? Recognizing that social media is here to stay. And if you want to speak a little bit to part 2, but I think part 2 will really delve into how do we help youth, families collectively work in terms of developing healthy digital habits. I do invite you again for part 2. Let's see if we can tackle some of these questions. So I guess recognizing the technological shifts throughout the history, talking about the radio, the creation of the radio, then the television, what are your suggestions for working with the technological boom, since it's not something that we can change? And I'm also curious if you have any positive outcomes from the advancement of technology on youth and children. So I know you spoke a little bit about this earlier on, but anything else that you'd want to add to this?
Yeah, I mean, I think that we actually are seeing a lot from, again, like we've got the ability to do fear mongering. And I will be totally transparent that 10 years ago, I would say what you do online is public and permanent, and it's going to like, be terrible for you. And I stopped that very quickly when I had a child actually come up to me and was like terrified that I had said something like that. And I thought, you know what, that's not fair to them. There is advancing technologies that are going to come by that are going to scare us, but we have to be the adults in the space and say it's going to be okay, let's figure it out together. And so I think that the positive parts of it is like really sitting down and allowing youth to explore and analyze it. So one of the examples that I would say is I had a presentation to an all-female school, and I did this teen, and I gave them this teen program. We have a peer technology leadership council program, and the kids took it and they did this whole campaign about Snapchat. And on February 14th, 580 of these kids out of 630 kids on campus all wrote the same letter. They signed this form letter that said, we love ourselves more than your tech, and canceled social media, their Snapchat accounts that day altogether on Valentine's Day. And so like it's just, it's inspiring them to understand that there's rules and like that part. So the good of technology, I think, is allowing them to come together and be able to share that. So that's one little small piece, but yeah, part two will definitely delve into a lot of that stuff too, because I do want to celebrate the good that comes out of it.
Great, thank you. And I know in the earlier chat, in terms of what are some of the concerns or challenges that folks had, there was a lot that was mentioned around decreased interpersonal skills, emotional regulation, bullying, sleep issues, the role of caregivers, consideration for unique needs, primarily also mentioned whether it's autism or ADHD, right? So intellectual and developmental disabilities. So going off of, I did just want to mention some of those things that were chatted in. But one of the questions, or a couple of questions that have come up, are how do you bring in caregivers to the conversation, right? So do you have any particular sort of safety measures or recommendations for caregivers to really bringing them into the conversation? Because I will probably say that, youth are I can go to my 8-year-old nephew to work my iPhone because I have no idea how to do that, right? So how do I step in and try to provide some sort of healthy habits for them when they are so much more in the know, right? So any thoughts around that?
Yeah, I think it's a great point. I think that having the ability to recognize and support your kids by saying to them, here's the things I'm really great at as a parent, here's some of the things I don't really know, is part of what we should be doing anyway. And so I think that sometimes that we come in as kind of a dictatorish approach in this space, which shuts the kids down even further. So if we can come in and say, hey, I want to do this together, let's understand this part together. And I use analogies with the kids oftentimes. I was like, do your parents let you ride your bike without a helmet? Would they drop you off at Madison Square Garden without an adult? If they're not going to let you in with 80,000 people in a stadium, then why are they going to put you online with 4.8 billion people on a daily basis? So, getting those kids to like understand that the safety measures are for them to be protected, and that you're not doing it to pull them away from something that they really love. And if they do it in that way, I see that much more positive from that perspective with parents and kids.
Great, thank you. Let's see if we can squeeze one or maybe two more questions. And when you were talking about the developmental stages, the question came in around how do we balance healthy teen exploration of identity and sexuality when it has become a primarily online venture with those potential harmful outcomes that you mentioned?
Say that first part one more time. Sorry.
Yeah, sure. How do we balance healthy teen exploration and of identity and sexuality when it's become primarily something that's done online?
So that's a really great question. One of the books that I lean into is called, it's Drew Pinsky and his daughter, who did this book. It Doesn't Have to Be Awkward is the name of the book. And it talks about consent, it talks about exploration, it talks about all of these different things that are kind of hard for parents to do. But it really truly is about their generation and how open that they need to be with one another and how we need to be as adults. I think adults should read the book to kind of understand what those issues are, because it's very, very different than what we were going through in the past. And so I think that if that's what I would suggest is getting the parents to educate themselves first, and then go in and say, all right, because it is familial decision making and how we have to do it. But doesn't that book is really, really a good place to start, and hopefully opens the hearts of the parents and the caregivers that are struggling with that.
Great, thank you so much. So I do recognize that we are almost at time. I do see that there was a comment just about the feedback survey. So if we can attend to that on our end, I don't know if it's linking to the pre-survey. But again, you know, in terms of that feedback survey that can also usually pops up as we close out. Any thoughts, additional thoughts around, you know, this particular offering? Maybe there's something that can be tweaked for offering number 2. Which again, will delve a little bit more into the complex relationship and really give you resources to how to attend to and support youth and children and families in a society that really does include technology. There's just no way around that. So how do we do that in a healthy way for folks? So yeah, again, I invite you to look at the link or the PDF of the section. It will be emailed to you. If you have more time, certainly read more sections. If not, at least picking one section, maybe something that you have noticed more so in the practice that you have. A lot of the things came through that actually do resemble what's listed here on this slide in terms of overuse or spending too much time with video games, social media, cyberbullying, things along those lines. So as we wrap up, I just want to go to our next slide, highlight some of the resources that were mentioned. So if there were questions around resources, you know, you'll have access to the slides within 2 to 3 days, so you can link to those. On the following slide, also some references that were mentioned. And on the slide after that, just our upcoming CTech events. Again, you have been registered for part 2, but I do want to highlight additional offerings that we have in the month of November. And on our very last slide, a huge thank you to Dr. Stroman for joining us today and sharing all of your information from so many different perspectives and backgrounds. And again, a big thank you to you, our audience, for joining us today. On behalf of CTech, we hope to see you for part 2 and certainly wish you a great rest of your week.